Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this panel. To set the context, I want to tell you a little story. And I'm a mother of a 12-year-old, and who's very fond of reading. So I said, okay, to develop your confidence and, to also sort of catalog all the books you're doing and to be able to synthesize it, let's start a channel for you on Instagram. It's called Valeska's Book World. And she started reviewing books there. So she started about, 3 or 4 years ago, where she would talk about the books that she read, what she, learned from it, and recommend those books or not recommend those books to young readers. As we grew in that journey, over a period of time, being a digital marketer myself, I started looking at what was trending on Instagram and started making her do reels based on that. And we do this exercise one weekend a month where we try and capture a bunch of videos, and then I edit them and I put it up on her channel. So she came to me last month and she said, Mama, we're not doing content, we're doing too much drama. So I said, okay, what is drama? What do you mean? So she's like, you make me act and do things, and that's not interesting. I said, so that's content also, right? Because you're getting a lot of views here and people love it. So what do you mean it's drama? People like to see all this. She's like, no, people like to get some value out of what I do. And the value that I bring is that I recommend books to them. So let's stick to that, right? And that was an insight of a 12-year-old who doesn't understand, I would say, authenticity of content or algorithms, but a beautiful insight from a young content creator's perspective. And I think that is what is the pertinent question today, that as marketers and very experienced marketers here, that how do you kind of create content in this huge digital era where the velocity of content is so high, it's so easy to get swayed by the algorithms. And what channels do you look at? Do you look at the channels which are provided and platforms which are provided by these large platforms, or do you create content for yourself in an organic way, in a channel that you own, and keeping, as marketers would love to say, keeping the center of the universe as the customer that you have in mind, and creating content for them in the traditional way of thinking, from top funnel to bottom funnel, which helps you all through the process of discovery, consideration, and finally maybe inquiries as well, right? And that's what here we are to discuss today. So thank you everybody for joining me. It's great to reconnect some old friends and meeting some new. And I want to start with you, Vijay, and ask you that, we have a compelling theme today. And how do you define authenticity today in this whole world which is led by algos?
I think to start with, let's understand what is the role of a content today. For the longest time, for the centuries, one thing that connects two people, and which is the story, the authentic story, the genuine story, and that connects two people. Today, what marketeers are trying to do, they are trying to put that story in the middle of a content, and that becomes a sort of a promotional tool. Now, for a traditional FMCG brand, when the content has become very important, because the other forms of media vehicles are going down, for example, TV is going down, the content is become like the primary source of promotional tool. No matter where you are disseminating that content, whether your own channels or through influencers or some other channel, the role of algorithm will always be there. Now, let's understand the algorithm is always going to be there. I mean, today there may be X algorithm, tomorrow there will be Y algorithm. But what brand is supposed to do? It is like shared story versus shared values. When let's say an influencer is posting a content, how authentic that content is. Is it coming across like a forced branded content, or it is seamlessly getting integrated into it? The algorithm will give you, let's say, exposure. It will give you impression. It will show you that, okay, this content piece is performing great on Excel sheet. You got that many impressions. You got those many likes and engagement, etc. It's like, but whether it is creating impact for you, that's a big question mark. How that impact will come? The impact will come when your audience resonate with that content piece. And for that, there needs to be a story, which is a relatable story in that content and not like a force-fit story. If your content has a good something that consumers are looking forward to it, they will like that content piece and algorithm will automatically support it. But do not create the content because there is some trending reel happening or some algorithm will push it forward. You will only get the performance on Excel, but not really in the real impactful performance for your content.
Thanks for sharing that. So create content which creates impact. I think that's my takeaway from what you're saying. And Pratik, building on that, I want to ask you to create impact. And what's the ground reality? I know in a day-to-day working environment, right? Are you looking at data and algorithms to see how to create impact, or are you looking at how to? You're looking at from a creative lens and saying, okay, this is what I should do to create impact. Everybody wants a viral campaign. It's the truth. And are we over-indexing on the data and the algos, is my question.
Yeah. So the way I look at it is, the first thing I sort of tell myself and tell the team that when it comes to influencer marketing and social content, patience is a virtue and really needs to be imbibed. It's a process and a journey, and it's not an immediate destination. So when it comes to measurability, it's not something that you tie up with one influencer, do an activity and check. You can, but that's where the creative lens comes in. As long as the brand's values, core ethos, the narrative has been captured, you need to consistently keep doing it, because this is the canvas on which the consumers are wanting to paint their colors and wanting to watch and view and read. So no brand can stay away from this particular canvas. I try and take a longer term view by doing consistent communication using influencers and then evaluating the impact of that maybe after a quarter or 6 months, rather than looking at it for any individual piece of particular content.
So,
a very important point Pratik mentioned, that it's not about the immediacy. It's not like you are trying to ride on a trend or riding on a bandwagon which is already going on. It's not virality versus consistency. Today you may get a great response to a content if you putting it on a trending topic, but is it going to impact your brand? That's a bigger question, and that's when the consistency comes into the picture. That's when the brand stories come into the picture.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to add, today as marketers, I think the biggest criticality is to keep eyes and ears open, to understand and to be able to identify who could be future potential influencers for you as a brand. Yes, there are enough and more tools that are available which tells you, but nothing like creating pseudo profiles of the target consumer that you want to sort of go after, and then basis that trying to identify who could be potential partners, right? So for example, some of you may be aware of, just giving an example, there's a guy, raise of hands people, right? There's a guy called Ankit Bayanpuria. How many of you have heard the name? 1 person, 2 persons, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can assure you, if I actually tell you about his content, a lot of you would have engaged with his content particularly on Insta. This is a guy who's from a small town in Haryana. He's actually a farmer's son. He has 8 million followers on Instagram. He's the guy who starts his video with Ram Ram Saryane, and he then talks about his health and his fitness program. I've seen a lot of nods. So there are lots of people who've seen it, right? Now imagine if I was a company looking after a company which is in the health fitness space, I would have by now immediately sort of tied up with him to try and promote my health range of products, right? So keeping and identifying people who could be in the future radar for espousing the brand's message is critical to be successful in today's day and age.
Sure, thanks for sharing that.
Just one more point to add to this. See, it's like that classic model of having celebrities on board. I mean, you would probably agree to that. Emami has been a company which has got a roster of all big celebrities on board. But what point Pratik mentioned, that it's time for brands to realize to create your own brand ambassadors who are true, who are authentic in their own way. I mean, no more like a big celebrity coming telling you, okay, I use this product. We all know that he wouldn't be like, Shahrukh wouldn't be driving Santro or any other car. So it's time that the point Pratik mentioned, it's very pertinent.
Of course. And Vijay, I want to pick on what Pratik said and asked you, he said something very important. He said you should have the patience to invest in real content which can make real impact, right? Is that the ground reality? As marketers, do you get the quarters to go by without delivering impact? And how do you manage your stakeholders in that situation? What is the real thing? I mean, it's nice to have that, but does it happen in reality? And I can tell you on the other side of it, leading an agency, we get severe pressure from clients saying that they have no time. So what do you think about that? And then, if we can add in a little bit, so that's my first question to you. And the second one is that, given that situation, what do you do to create a balance between content which, as marketers, you truly love and you think is impactful for consumers, keeping your consumer in the center, and yet balancing it out with the algo?
Sure, I think I wish I could really answer it in as many lenses as I'm going to speak. But we're in the business of content. Like, we create stories that people love, right? And it's a lot about here and now for us, because there's something that's going to be released that needs to have its buzz, that has a certain shelf life. So it's a lot about really being in the moment and trying to capitalize on pre-launch, post-launch, sustenance, etc. So that's how it's really looked at. So from that lens, a very much here and now is as important as a long term. So of course, as in from an umbrella brand perspective, what is it that we're driving about Shemaroo is definitely important, and where we have. So I think it's also about the objectives that you're driving for one particular campaign or a thought, and also then a larger brand thought. So I think that has to be in line. So for example, when we were launching a show called Shamshan Champa on Shemaroo Umang, it basically was about a witch that's not evil, right? So everybody thinks about Diane. So when I say Diane to you, you actually think about something, you have an image in your head. So for us, it becomes all the more tricky because, we've already have content. We need to kind of get some people talking about that content. So how do you make the audience a part of that? So once you do that anyways drives, a lot of authenticity, a lot of participation, right? And the algorithm also kind of really supports that. So we just ask the audience saying, okay, what is your image of a Diane? And we asked them to, so they said, okay, sharp nails, long hair. So we created, like, using AI and then VFX, we created these versions of Diane. And then we said, hey, you know what? Our Diane is not this. She's somebody who's really, on the positive side. So it was like an Achi Diane. So basically that really drove home the point, and in a very organic way. And we reached like about 25 million, got a reach of 25 million organically on this, which, no amount of really seeded content or something that we would have done could have really driven that. So I think it's about understanding what is it that the consumer is going to really connect with, and you leverage on it and you amplify it. Of course, sometimes you are going to use paid media, you are going to leverage on influencers, but it's about understanding what really truly matters to the consumer, and then you kind of build around it, and then it kind of takes. Then platforms, formats, they are all kind of vehicles of delivery. So I think that's something that a brand needs to understand.
Thanks for sharing that. And I agree. It's about, making it interactive and understanding what the consumer wants also. But Ashish, I want to ask you, in today's day and age, Does the consumer want one thing? Like, I'm a consumer, one day I want one thing, one day I want another thing, right? Sometimes I like short form, sometimes I like long form, sometimes I like the algos, sometimes I get really irritated with the algos because I think they're trying to, make me think in a certain way or make some purchase decisions. So how do you navigate that space where consumers, do you think consumers know what they want really? And as a marketer, how do you then build content and straddle that space?
So there's no straight answer to that. And I think in your question itself, you talked about the fact that today the consumer wants something, tomorrow he or she may want something else, right? So I think it's very crucial to understand what stage of the journey the consumer is in and what is his or her mindset at that point of time. If you were to take an example of auto loans, right, car loans, and for a consumer, the journey of buying a car starts 2 months before he decides on a car loan, right? And the business is influenced a lot by the auto dealers. They have a great amount of influence on which loan you would take. Now, if I were as a brand to ensure that there's high affinity and when the purchase moment happens, he takes a auto loan, it's crucial that I maybe have content which is related to how to buy the best car for yourself, how to buy a better car than what you have planned for, right? And in doing that, based on his life cycle, if he is at or she is at the beginning of the journey, the kind of content that I will want to create is more about how to select the right car for me. And there we need far more authentic content, right? Compared to if I go to a stage in the journey where the person is almost deciding that now I have to take the car loan because I've decided the car that I'm going to buy, right? At that stage, maybe Algorithmic might work better because at that stage he's looking at interest rates, who's the best, who will do it the fastest for me, who will have the least amount of documents required. So in that sense, I think really based on the consumer life stage journey, it makes a difference. The second aspect is if you look at it from our perspective, right? And as a marketer, I might have multiple objectives at different points in time. And if I have to create brand love, I think authentic content plays a huge role in doing that, right? And somewhere we were having a discussion and Pratik mentioned the way the world is moving, creating your own authentic influencers may also be a thing of the future, right? We did take a stab at it. We have created Vigilante, which is a social media influencer we have created and we own. And the kind of engagements that we are seeing with her is far higher than we see on branded handles of the bank. So in that sense, I think it's really, there's no straight answer. At different points of time, authentic may be far more important, and at different points of time, algorithmic, very specific data points with very specific sort of behavioral inputs that I'll decide to target the consumer and get very specific communication or content delivered to them.
I think that's very well put, Ashish. I think what I'm taking away is that create intelligent content. Yes. Sometimes, more, which is when different stages of the funnel require different things, and for that, create intelligent content thinking about where the customer is in their journey. Yeah. So I think that's a good takeaway to take.
There's just one more aspect to this that I'd like to build in is. One is in terms of the content, right? And whether I create authentic content and I create algorithmic content, right? The second part is the delivery, right?
Correct.
Now, I could possibly also create authentic content, but when I'm delivering it, I might use algorithms to ensure that the right people get the right form of content, right? And hence it could be a mix in terms of the development happens through authentic means and the delivery may happen through algorithmic. So even that combination is quite possible.
Of course. So use the best of both. And Irina, coming to you, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into what Ashish kind of mentioned, that then, while you can create intelligent content where you have like your business goals, and I think as marketers, all of you have business goals at all point in times, and maybe they supersede. But at the heart of it, all marketers like to create brand love, right? How do you navigate the space of creating brand love, in this whole era of where you have to also, keep in mind the algorithm and not just look at the authenticity?
We're very lucky that way. So the recent example, we had an organic post. We did not collaborate with the influencer. She had some 6,000 followers, and she generated the post with our iconic product, and it had more than 2 million engagement in a day.
Fantastic.
So it is more about nostalgic feeling, because it won't be a secret when you ask people about Oriflame, they will say it's a product my mom used to use. But at the same time, we work a lot with user-generated content, because as your daughter rightly noticed, it has to add value. And what we noticed right now, what works the best for us is when you kind of have a concept of beauty insider, when you give the tips, when you share your own experience of using the product. And in Oriflame, we have a special program where we don't create influencers, but we train content creators. Because we explain them how it should work, what is the calendar, we give them the reference of the posts, and definitely it's important not to have false claims, because you hardly have a control. So we can even give some guidelines on what kind of claims you can give in the in your hashtag, for example. So then they go ahead, and naturally the best one gets the best traction. But that way it creates authentic content, and then, as you rightly mentioned, the delivery, not only to reach the right person, but not to create this annoying noise pollution. It's extremely important, and there are multiple ways, and definitely it depends on the company strategy, which can be different for everyone.
Amazing insight. So what you're saying is, rather than while you're also maybe partnering with influencers, but you're training content creators. So that's like really interesting. And I think Ashish also mentioned about the content creator that they've created at their end. And Vijay, I want to ask you, lending in from what Irina just said, are brands now looking at themselves becoming sort of, and Pratik mentioned this while we were having a little conversation before that, becoming publishers themselves or content creators themselves, or taking the responsibility to create more and more content rather than just relying on platforms? Is that the trend that you're seeing, and do you see benefits on that in doing that to kind of evoke more trust with your consumers?
I think I would say the future of advertising is a branded content, and the more control the brands have on how relatable content the brand wants to create. Like, let's say if you are taking few influencers on board, of course you can control the kind of content that they create, but how it will impact to the consumers, it's very hazy world there. But when the brand has a complete control on the kind of content we want to create, we can set the context, we can ensure the authenticity of the content, we can ensure the the relevance of the content with respect to the product or the benefits or the category. So I think there is a great deal, the way brands are moving forward, there would be more and more controlled environment of content creation rather than relying on the other people.
So you see that's a trend that brands are focusing towards, starting to own their content, create more content. And Pratik, I want to ask you, because you started this interesting conversation while we were outside the room, to become a content creator, to become a publisher for a brand, right? Like in the traditional word, we would call it publishers. How easy or tough is it? Because to be a publisher and in this world where there's so much content which is required to be, you have to optimize for the algorithms, right? Even when you create that content so that it reaches the right people. How do you manage that? Because it's not the core of the business you're in, right? How can brands do that well? How should they think about becoming sort of content creators themselves and creating content for their own assets rather than just relying on platforms?
Yeah, so I'll start with saying that there are examples that exist today of some leader brands that we are all aware of who've looked at content as a main constituent of their entire canvas of brand narrative. A brand like Red Bull, a brand like Coke, Red Bull through all its events and its active energy sports content that it sort of puts out, Coke through its Coke studio. Spotify with some of the content it does as a music platform. So for any other category, for any other brand, I think they need to look at three things. First, who is their audience? What are the types of content or what are the areas that their audience would want to be associated with for that particular brand, where the brand's message can be painted as a brand on the canvas. And third, either build a team, a content team in-house, which is an integral part and not a support function, or partner with somebody externally, some of the best agencies that are available, and set up a in-house content studio. And then test out multiple platforms. There are half a dozen or a dozen platforms that exist today on social and digital. Test it out on what their audience is sort of relating with. Is it Twitter? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it YouTube? Could it be Snapchat if it's a youth sort of, teens, millennial brand? And then see where the engagement metrics are and then sort of progress from there.
Yeah, just like Ashish, you want to add to it, but I'm also putting a follow-up question on the same point, and maybe you can address that as well. Yeah. It's like, I think it seems like a great idea, but do you get the support of the management to invest into content? That's my follow-up question to that. Yeah. Ashish, you wanted to say something, sir.
Just to add, I think, to what Pratik said, is yes, we need to set up content, right, development, but brands need to be bolder. And when I say bolder, we are all very comfortable to operate in the category we are in, right? And if you ask me financial services, I'll talk about a loan, I'll talk about a fixed deposit, I'll talk about investments. But if we have to engage with the customers in a more meaningful way, I think it has to go beyond the core product that we do and the end use of a product or the environment in which the product is consumed. I think we need to be bold enough to step into those spaces which may not be our core, but then which will really create a long-term and sustainable engagement with our consumers.
That's the question I have, for Advesh and Arina, who want to add
Sorry, I preempted.
How do you convince your stakeholders to invest in a long-term content strategy, which, again, I'm being absolutely candid, being on the other side. As agency partners, we always go and tell our clients to do that, and I know marketers want to do it, but they do struggle, right, convincing the stakeholders. So how do you do that?
I worked with quite a few legacy brands, so I completely, resonate with that. I think it's a lot about just proving small successes, like run pilots that work and then scale them up. So immediately, if you look at a very broad plan and, you look at a very long-term vision kind of thing, you have to obviously prove the proof of the pudding really lies in the results. So as soon as you start proving those small pilots that work, then that trust slowly builds in. And then of course it is also about understanding finally how is it going to contribute to the business. So how are you building that correlation? So if it is say content, then how do we set up those long-term brand tracks to kind of at least understand how's the needle moving on mind measures, right? So there has to be some level of measurability that needs to be built, and that is very dependent on the category, on the way that you're looking at it. But yes, it is baby steps. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think it's a process, and sometimes you get there, sometimes you don't. But of course, I mean, if you don't take a stab at all, then you anyways are not doing much.
I completely agree with you, because India in general is an extremely sophisticated market when it comes to communication, and it's always about strategy, it's about targeting, and it's about ROIs, and then what might work in one region might not show the results in another. So what we do, because unfortunately we also don't have unlimited marketing budget, I wish, we also do small experiments, and then we see how it performs, and then build a strategy basis the real results. And even algorithms changed in the last 3 years, demand change, and things are so dynamic that you can't stick to one strategy for like several years in a row. You always have
several months.
Yeah, you always have to come up with something new to be in line.
That's right. You want to say
No,
something?
I think just to add one more point to this, for FMCG today, quick commerce platforms are very important, the way they are growing. And I think the brands are now getting inspired with the kind of content that these quick com platforms or food delivery platforms have started creating in-house. So today, let's say if I give an example of, and I was recently having a meeting with one of the largest quick com platforms, what they are telling us is we will create content for you. You don't have to go anywhere. And it will be a branded content. That platform and brand will come together. We will create almost like a viral kind of a content. So brands are getting inspired to be little bolder, coming out of that closet and experimenting on new things.
That's amazing. That's very refreshing to hear. And my follow-up question to that is and Anvesha, you mentioned measurability of content. Again, my question is on that whole split. How much of it is performance content and how much of it is actually brand love? And how much time can you give content which is actually going to generate brand love? How many quarters do you give it before you said we're going to start measuring the impact of it, right? And anyone, if you can take a stab, it's not like my question to any particular person, whoever.
So how I've typically approached it, and all the teams that we've worked, how we've looked at it is that we look at a full funnel thinking. I mean, it's not really one is separate from the other. And when a user engaging with your content, they don't know it's performance marketing or it's branding or they don't really view it in that lens, right? They're just engaging with your content and taking the action or just taking away something. So I think it's about how you really build that funnel and also leverage on your brand love to actually drive performance. If you're looking at it in slightly disjointed ways, then that's where I think it becomes even more tough to kind of crack it. It's always easier said than done again because different platforms won't talk to each other. There is limitations on how much data can be used, etc. But there is a way that at least you start looking at, when you start looking at that model in totality versus looking at it in separate segments, is I think where that problem kind of starts getting to get solved.
Sure.
I also think the fundamentals of marketing don't change, right? And over the years, we've been investing in building brands through ATL, like television, and we've never expected it to get turned around in one campaign. We've invested in it for the long term, right? So to my mind, if I have still focused on building a brand, creating brand love, I do have to continue investing over a longer period of time. I think the thinking or the belief that we need to get into the system is that content can also play a key role in doing this in the current ecosystem, right? And if you have to do that, I think to build this conviction, I think like Anvesha said, experiment, prove it in small bits, and then build up to make it a key part of your brand building mix.
Yeah, go ahead, Ari.
We are also prioritizing, I keep switched off all the time, thank you. So we are prioritizing brand love as well. And the reason is nowadays, in the last 3 years, there were more than 600 cosmetic brands that appeared on the market. And how do you stand out? There's no point to go to the consumer saying my product is the best. You need to talk about how is your brand adding value, how is it different to other brands on the market. So for us, priority is brand love when it comes to all the digital campaigns.
That's refreshing to hear. I want to just switch gears and talk a little bit about algos more again and have a couple of questions there. And maybe, Ashish, I'm going to ask you, what do you think, there's a lot of short form content that is happening right now, all right? And my personal view is short form content is like putting a billboard in the woods because there's so much, unless you kind of promote it, nobody notices it, and it's sort of a cycle, and it's a tough one for marketers because it has more engagement, the algorithms promote it, and it's all very complicated and convoluted, if I can just say. So, how do you kind of navigate that space? How do you think about making? Have you seen areas where this kind of strategy has backfired? In your experience, have you got into that trap sometimes? You said that, okay, let's pause, this is not working for us, and this is our learning, and change your strategy. If you can, share some of those examples that you may have seen either in your own company or some other brands doing that, I think that'll be very useful, where somebody's like had the temptation to follow the algos and take a pause, reset, and rethink and redeploy a more consistent strategy.
Yes, I think so. And I think the simplest way to illustrate this is if you're doing an algo-based sort of promotion, right, or a campaign. The idea is it identifies who's the TG and how do I reach them, through which influencer or through which channel, right? It just focuses on who the TG is, but not the platform through which this is getting delivered, right? And in that sense, I think the risk that we have is if the particular influencer, the piece of content that you have created does not align with your brand values, right? That could hurt you. And we've seen social media today there's a lot of activism happening. They're very quick to latch on to something and pick up and create a huge furor around it. And there have been times when we have had to react and quickly change course. One example would be we have created our own influencer, Vigilante, right? And suddenly there was this huge noise around it where some activists started saying that, hey, why is the bindi a stop symbol? Is it hurting the religious sentiments of Hindus? Now, whether it was politically motivated or it was a genuine cause, we really don't know. But it created a lot of noise, right? And the question was, should we stand for what is right, that this doesn't really hurt religious sentiments, and that's the view of the larger audience, versus saying that, hey, for the brand, the bindi really, the stop sign doesn't really make a difference to the objective that the campaign is trying to serve, right? Which is about creating awareness about frauds. So there was a point till which we debated and said we'll hold our ground and we will stand for it as a brand. But then we realized it was taking our attention away from the core, which is about creating awareness on frauds. So we took a step back, we changed the bindi, we quietened the noise, right? And we had a full blue bindi, not even red, with a full dot there. And we got back to saying, let's keep creating content on the latest, newest ways of fraudsters' modus operandi, right? So that's something.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's amazing to be able to cut through that noise and take that stand and come back to what you started creating content for. I think, thanks for sharing that example. I think it's very insightful for a lot of people here. And Irina, I want to ask you this whole thing that, of course, data and technology is really important in today's world of marketing, right? And we cannot undermine that. But given that, how do you kind of balance it out by not getting manipulated, like what I'm using a stronger word than how Ashish described it, by the algorithms, and still, leverage the data and technology and stay core to what you want to communicate?
In the first place, team is extremely important because all this automation, it's great, but it's nothing without human touch. Again, micro tests, A/B testing, so we go in the right direction. And as I mentioned before, we prioritize the customer experience. It has to be about the content that adds value. And one more important part, I believe, authenticity and trustability, relatability is extremely important. Hence, when it comes to algorithms, it's also a crucial point to be transparent, and all the consent forms, they're required so your customer knows how the data is used. But definitely, as I said before, algorithms we cannot avoid because for us, the specific of the business is such, we have a lot of information to share every month, a lot of new launches, promotions, events, trainings, etc. And to avoid this information pollution, you just cannot get away with automation. To communicate in a proper way, you really need to track the audience, segment it in a right way, and deliver the right information in the right time to right people.
No, I think, again, very insightful. Cut out the noise, use the data and technology to cut out the noise and focus on the basics that you want to. No, thanks for sharing that. I think we're just are getting out of time. I don't know if we have time for questions, maybe one or two if anybody has for the panel.